time to move these out of the way. Because today, we're covering a horror series. Ever wonder what old-timey Europe would look like in the eyes of a Japanese horror-creating mangaka? Well, with Junji Ito's adaptation of the OG monster stories, Frankenstein, of course originally written by Mary Shelley, you get exactly that. A horrifying retelling of the classic story, with a scientist gone mad within the eye of creating new life from a dead thing. The Frankenstein retelling only lasts just about 180 pages of, this monstrosity, and you can tell there's more than 180 pages in this sucker, so what's with the rest of it? Well, you see that lovely little corner part? Story collection. There's about, 8 or 9 stories in here. More than 8 or 9. There's actually 11 stories in here. But before we start, of course, and get into the whole voiceover part, so you don't have to look at this, I am your host, Sloppy, of the Weeaboo Corner. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And now, let's let you guys get into it and enjoy my lovely voice, shall we? Goodbye. See you in a couple minutes, actually. The title story is a standard retelling that melds separate portions of Frankenstein's mythos, like the Bride of Frankenstein, the monster taking part in the gathering of her materials, more specifically being her head, and the monster going into permanent hiding once its creator passes, along with the monster story being told by Victor to another creator, though here it's only used as a ploy for the story's ending. What I really appreciate about Ito's retelling is that he borrows a huge detail from the original story by Mary Shelley that's often tossed to the wayside, more specifically the monster's actual understanding of the English language and being incredibly intelligent within his speech. Again, often forgotten by the monster's most well-known outings. The original film is most famous for this, with Boris Karloff being uncredited. Of course, because that's what it said, the monster is played by unknown to keep him shrouded in mystery, but it ended up being found out as Boris Karloff, who only groaned throughout the film. And in subsequent sequels and readaptations, the only thing he ever really knows is that fire is bad. And he'll constantly either say that or just groan throughout the film. The story here opens with an expedition towards the North Pole, with the ship being stuck in ice. The head of the expedition keeps saying to push further on, while seeing a large silhouette in the distance, soon discovering Victor Frankenstein stranded on a small broken-off ice cap separated from the rest of the sheets. After he awakes, he tells the story of his life, that being of a happy rich kid, heavily invested in alchemy and other various sciences, eventually becoming obsessed with chemistry and anatomy, eager to make the next big discovery as a college student, and with his rather prestigious college backing him and his experimentation, he's on loan for any equipment he requests and lands on creating life from the dead, basing his hypothesis off the similar experiment done with the dead frog and the charged knife. At night and alone, he breaks into graveyards and collects all the materials he needs, limbs, organs, and all, and constructs his human being, an 8-foot-tall gorilla of a man made of all sorts of cadaverous pieces, save for his several organs that he couldn't get his hands on, in which he either stole from dead or lost animals, and creates his own brain out of trial and error. With an electric charge waking him, the creature rises in horror, while Victor exclaims, "Tonight I become God!" Yet, when his eyes rest on the creature before him, he falls back in horror at the thing in front of him. Due to an unforeseen set of circumstances, Victor's family is eventually all found dead, as is the female creature he was ordered to create for the monster as a bride, and with the aftermath of a killing spree in his sights, he sets off to find the monster that he created and put an end to him. And that is where I'll leave off for the title story. While frightening and a good read, I did find several problems that stick out, which I feel is better to talk about. The story is, I did actually very enjoy this title story of Frankenstein, more particularly the retelling portions of it and the inclusion of forgotten elements. But it does overstay its welcome a tad bit. There's a large amount of portions where it's a very long conversation between the monster and Victor, especially when he's ordering him with all these details about creating the female monster to be his bride, making her as horrifying as he to ensure that the only partner for her be he. Yet when the head is brought to the laboratory by the monster, the head in selection happens to be a woman of extreme beauty who ends up being horrified at the monster and is promptly killed by him. Which on its own is fine as a show of irony, malice, and a lack of common sense within the monster. But the main issue that being is that the monster's head is shown on every single occasion with him in frame to be stitched together haphazardly with just random bits of flesh, and is not a whole piece, which is incredibly frightening as the skin used was already past the point of rot when he had awoken. So why couldn't Victor do the same for the woman's head? Yeah, it's a bit of a nitpick, but hey, I'm a bastard weeaboo, so deal with it. And the next point I'm going to bring up is I actually blame towards Viz, the Western publisher. There are several large spelling and grammatical errors that stick out like a sore thumb in an otherwise tightly written and translated story. Most namely with the quote that opens up the book, "Tonight I become God." It's actually read as "Tonight I am become a god," which I am going to point towards Viz mistaking and fucking up with its lack of localization. Or I guess less localization and more just fixing grammar, because the rest of the story is completely fine, save for a few errors, but they otherwise go somewhat unnoticed, which is in contrast to the opening quote. I will go into another story included within the books, that way I can milk this thing for another week or two. Next Spectre, the longest within the book, only lasting 30 pages aside from Frankenstein, of course. Next Spectre is an interesting short, taking an old Japanese urban legend of the Rokurobi, long-necked spirits that usually take the form of a beautiful woman, and taking that to the nines, which is actually used to keep people from staying in past midnight, as these spirits' heads would elongate and rotate to find ponds of water, or sometimes the heads would fully detach and float around. A young boy murders his friend for growing too tall within the early years of high school, which causes him to soak up all the female attention. So he's murdered out of jealousy, and within burying the body, he picks the garden. And one day he finds himself checking the depth of the grave, figuring that he'll need to move it soon as it's too shallow. But the body keeps on growing taller when he does go to move it, despite being dead for nearly a week at this point. Most namely, the neck. He begins to hallucinate his class and adult mentors' necks growing as long as hell, even looping around to avoid hitting the roof. And he eventually beats someone to the ground because of it, but spills all the information to the police, considering he does get arrested for assault and attempted murder. When the original body is exhumed, it's found that everything on the corpse was growing, his head poking out of a nearby wall, as are the hands and legs. Now back to camera work. Congratulations. And those are the two stories featured in Junji Ito's story collection, Frankenstein, released originally in 2013 and then printed here in the States for the first time back in 2018. Definitely not the strongest for the first two stories. Hell, this review isn't even that good. But at least where horror is concerned, they are fairly frightening, and I cannot wait to cover the rest of the stories within the coming weeks, along within the covers. I picked up my copy at Barnes & Noble's for about $23, give or take, and it runs for $32 in Canada and about $19 in the UK. I would suggest it for early Junji Ito readers, as it's not as horrifying as some of these stories compiled in Smash, my personal favorite story collection, and doesn't run too long past its welcome like Tomy or Uzumaki for early readers. This and Gyo, actually, I recommend to new Junji Ito readers, because the stories in them are short, and Gyo is the first really long-standing novelization, as it was in two main parts and released as one large story. The slow burn atmosphere of the title stories and the others being much shorter are also reasons why I do actually enjoy this for new and somewhat younger Junji Ito readers. And all the other short stories are less than a third of the title series of length. And I do hope, if you do end up checking them out, I hope you do enjoy them. Please let me know what you thought of them and this short little mini review that I just wanted to crank out and get to you guys. And I will see you all next Friday, the upcoming Friday, every single Friday if I can, for another, hopefully much longer, manga review. I am Sloppy of the Weeaboo Corner. This has been a short little review of Junji Ito's Frankenstein, and I will see all of you next week. See you later.